Welcome to the Forest of Thought with me, Ingrid Rieser. I always preferred to do interviews in person, and last summer I had the pleasure of taking the podcast on a mini tour to France and the UK, diving into 5 different conversations on everything from the mystery of imagination to the power of song. I like traveling slowly, so I took my time getting on the train in Uppsala and eventually winding my way all the way down to western France, to what has become known as the ZAD in Notre-Dame-des-Landes, Brittany. ZAD is short for Zone à défendre, a zone to defend. And this ZAD rose to fame because after 40 years of struggle, the inhabitants of the zone managed to stop the building of a planned airport through tireless work and unlikely alliances. The success of the ZAD raises very interesting questions, like how do we manifest the world we would like to see? How are modes of creativity such as art and activism connected to things like magic and ritual? How does being rooted in a place help us to defend it? Our guide for this episode is Isa Fremeaux, who is a writer, activist, and resident of the ZAD.
The more you inhabit a territory, the more you truly inhabit a territory, the more it inhabits you. And then you know exactly why you're defending it and you're prepared to give so much to defend it. Because it's not just an idea or a principle that you're defending and fighting against. You are actually protecting the lanes that you've found yourself falling in love with, the people that you've, shared an incredible adventure with. It's the forest that you've defended against cops. It's all that. That anchoring has been one of the most powerful lessons.
Isa is an educator and action researcher, formerly senior lecturer in media and cultural studies at Birckbeck College, London. Together with her partner, Jay Jordan, she's among other things created Pathways to Utopia, a film book project exploring utopian communities in Europe, and the Laboratory of Insurrectionary Imagination, where they run experiments at the intersection between art and activism. Their 2021 book, We Are Quote-Unquote Nature Defending Itself, explores these ideas further, and also takes the reader along on the journey of the ZAD, following episodes of the struggle, such as confrontations with police, challenges of collaboration and hosting of assemblies, and also the joy that can be sustained in the midst of adversity. I met Isa at the height of summer, with the insects buzzing outside. She'll help set the scene for you in just a moment. So I was wondering if we could start with you telling us a little bit about where it is we are right now, where we're sitting.
So we are actually in the exact middle of a yurt where I live with my partner amongst a collective of 10 people. And we are actually bang in the center of the ZAD, which is a territory in the west of France, east of Brittany, that was liberated from a international airport project through a 45-year-old struggle that was as determined as it was creative and magnificent. And that struggle was marked especially by the fact that because of turns of events through its history, people could live for about 6 years in a greater level of autonomy that is usually known in Western Europe, where basically police and state institutions didn't set foot to this territory that is about 4,000 acres of bocage, which is a landscape of farmland and wetlands, and characterized by small fields that are marked by a lot of hedgerows. And where we are here is very, very near where they wanted to put the control tower. So if we look out of the window, we can actually see where we built a lighthouse instead, because we did not want a control tower. We wanted a tower to warn against the dangers and welcome people to port. So this is where we are in this beautiful, very green at the moment landscape that was saved through struggle.
Could you say something about what you think is maybe unique about this place, or the struggle that resulted in the airport not being built?
I think that there are many different dimensions that I think are, or rather, I think it's the combination of a large set of dimensions that are not unique, but the fact that they were woven here made it unique. I mean, I think that one dimension that is unique is that not that is unique. One of the dimensions that is rare enough to be noticed is that it won, and I think that it's important to tell stories of victories, because I think that especially the left is very bad at remembering its own victories. But I think that the unique dimensions that led to that are the fact that it was a very diverse movement that brought together local residents and farmers and trade unionists and younger people from very, very different walks of life, squatters, people that were educated, and many that weren't educated in the sense of having gone through higher education. Everyone is educated here. People coming also from different political perspectives, and that large panel of people and sense of belongings we called the composition here. And I think it's a very beautiful word that talks a lot about what was attempted and often, I think, succeeded, was to actually compose. Like you compose a beautiful piece of music, is that a beautiful piece of music is very rarely made out of one note or just one set of note. And I think that what was beautiful here is that there was really the sense of let's try to aim for this together with a sense of shared values, but without trying to make the others becoming yourself. And I think that was something that is something that we try to nourish, and that is really important. It's very complicated. It involves loads of arguments and tensions, but it also generates incredible moments of unity in diversity. So I think that that's one dimension. Another dimension, I think, is also that, and I think it's a consequence of that diversity and composition, is the fact that it's a movement that allowed a diversity of tactics, and also that was incredibly creative in always trying to be a step ahead, and had a sense of a real vision. And for instance, in 2015, that took the form of a cycle of assemblies to produce a text that was way more than just a text, but that was what we call in the jargon of the struggle the 6 points for the future of the ZAD. And so basically, more than 3 years before the airport was cancelled, the movement here had the capacity to say there will be no airport on this site, and this is what our vision is for after. And I think that capacity to have magical thinking. Magical thinking is that you basically put your intention and you give that intention your everything. And I think that this is what this movement has done, and really to shift the perspective from saying we are against the airport to there will be no airport is something that for me has been an incredible lesson in being visionary, because in those 6 points there was really important values and principles about what this territory should be like after the cancellation of the project. So I think that's really, these are important. I think that another dimension is, and perhaps it would be the most important, I think it's stupid to try to make hierarchies anyway, so I'm not going to try. So, but another dimension that is really crucial is to deploy the yes and the no in the same gesture. Is that basically what the strategy has been here, is to be very clear as to what it was that was opposed and to have a strategy of opposition. So it's like, there will be no airport because it's a nefarious and destructive piece of infrastructure. So there will be no accommodation possible, and it's no airport here, nor anywhere. And that meant organizing the quite known forms of opposition, demonstrations, legal procedures, etc. And in the same gesture saying yes, through living here and anchoring ourselves here and building infrastructures and nourishing the land and taking care of the bocage and taking care of each other through self-organization and to always say yes and no. And I think that this is one of the reasons why the ZAD and the movement here became such a embodiment of hope for so many people, that it was not just yet another movement that said we don't want this infrastructure. Is that there was a real attempt that is incredibly messy and imperfect and complicated, but there is a real attempt to deploy what we feel the world or our world should be a bit more like. And I think that has been really crucial, because what this necessarily involves is anchoring yourself, and is that you become the territory. It's like, what we hear a lot here, and I've certainly lived through it myself, is that the more you inhabit a territory, the more you truly inhabit a territory, the more it inhabits you. And then you know exactly why you're defending it, and you're prepared to give so much to prepare it, to defend it. You're prepared to give so much to defend it, because it's not just an idea or a principle that you're defending and fighting against. Is that it becomes much more than that. Is that you are actually protecting the lanes that you've found yourself falling in love with, the salamanders that you have been careful not to step over during the winter nights. It's the people that you've shared an incredible adventure with. It's the forest that you've defended against cops. It's like, it's all that. And I think that anchoring has been one of the most powerful lessons for me is also one of the things that I was looking for. I lived in London for many years, being very involved in loads and loads of social movements that, you know, I have absolutely no regret having been part of, and still am convinced that it was really important, but that were very deterritorialized. And I think that this is what it's by coming here that I could experience the incredible power of indigenous struggles that know what it is to be of a territory.
Maybe you could say something about, you know, how you view the role of imagination and experimentation in these kinds of processes.
I don't think you can have a struggle without imagination, because it seems to me that by definition, to launch yourself in a movement that is saying no to a project like an airport and yes to other ways of living is because you have the capacity to actually think, well, if they build it, I have a sense of what it's going to produce, and there is no way we can allow that. And to be able to say yes, and you need to be able to project and have a vision of what it is that you feel is preferable. And I think that it seems to me that with imagination comes a sense of joy, comes a sense of having desire for throwing yourself into a battle, not just against, but for a certain texture of life. And I think that it's really, really, really important to remember that everything we take for granted, absolutely everything, from, you know, the fact that, you know, we're, I believe, both identifying as women and both wearing trousers, to the, you know, right to strike, to weekend, the, you know, contraception, abortion, the fact that, you know, slavery is no longer an acceptable policy, that child labor is also something that is officially unacceptable, even though there's still a lot of practices, is that these were initially crazy ideas, totally unrealistic.
To abolish those things.
You know, and it's like it required the imagination of very brave people, and then struggle and disobedience. It's like not asking politely from benevolent authorities, but actually, you know, disobeying to be able to get it. And I think that the imagination is this capacity to not think, well, this is what there is, and that's all there can be. It's this capacity to, think, well, what if it was different? And then I think that for me the most important is to not stop there. It's like, you know, that's why I'm not a novelist. That's why I'm an activist. It's like, I love novels, but I think that, you know, we need to do more than just stopping at what if. To move from what if to work and live as if it was there is really, really important. I think that otherwise social movements, but I think life in general, if you don't have that, you just shrink. Just shrink into disappearance.
And the interesting thing is that it seems like we have a sort of impoverished imagination, where maybe we think that other ways of doing things are, we have quite limited ideas about what that would entail. And we get into maybe thinking in ruts and so on. How do you sort of approach that?
Well, there is this really, really known, and I think it's becoming boring to say that, and yet I think it's so important to say, yes, I think it's true that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine different ways of living together in a more just way. And yeah, I think that a lot of our capacity to imagine has been taken away, has been stolen by capitalist structures and capitalist education, and at the same time I also believe that there still is plethora of really, really rich narratives and cosmologies, and that we just need to relearn to listen to and respect, because I think that this is one of the things that colonialism has done, is to actually have so little respect for other narratives and other cosmologies that we are not even able to listen to them, let alone find them legitimate. And I think that, when you start looking at alternative, indigenous, not alternative, but not just indigenous narratives, and that's not just the exotic indigenous from the other side of the world. It's like, we live in Brittany that has, amazing stories and cosmologies, and I guess it's exactly the same in Scandinavia, and it's just there, the capacity. And I think that capacity to re-listen and re-embrace these narratives, I'm quite convinced that it would be enough to just trigger our capacity to imagine. And that is not to say that these narratives are just imagination, but I think that I think that one of the major factors for this very impoverished imagination is the impoverished narratives that we are being fed. And I think that when you get in touch again to very rich, complex narratives and cosmologies, I think that your capacity to imagine other ways of apprehending the world becomes improved. So
do you want to say anything about art? Because I know that you were you a lecturer in media and culture studies?
Yeah.
And you write a bit about how art as we know it is maybe not for sort of fulfilling the function in society that it could be doing.
Well, one of the things that we talk about in the book is that art as we know it is a very recent invention.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an invention that comes with, and not just historically, I think that it's part and parcel of the modern project. It comes with the Industrial Revolution, this notion that there would be that dimension of life that would be totally autonomous from the rest, that only some kind of chosen geniuses would have access to, and that would be, decoupled from from life, from usefulness, from... That is very recent, is that, and one of the things that is interesting and that is really, really important to bear in mind, in my view, is that the word art, as we understand it, doesn't exist in many, many, many languages. Just that concept is not there. Is that because the idea that you can take art out of life and out of the everyday and to put it in very specific places is very new, and it comes with the colonial project as well. Understand, these things they're not coincidental. They are absolutely enmeshed.
Why do you think that is?
Because I believe that what came with the Industrial Revolution and the colonial project and is based on the idea that you just fragment everything and you disconnect everything, and so you rip apart what actually is totally entwined everywhere all the time.
So art was previously conceived as a part of life, as what you do, as your craft, as your expression, as your life.
Yeah, was what you pay attention to. It's like, it's the ontological terms, but this idea that nature and culture are two very, very different spheres in life that are autonomous, and that the mission of one is to actually control the other. I mean, when you start thinking about it, you're like, yeah, no wonder we are in this shit. It's just, it's a deadly project. It's a deadly project. So we're dying from it, and so, but that is not to say that it's not to say that there was that, or that that in the cultures where there is not the word art in the language, that there is no artistic practice. That is not to say that, as that actually every culture, absolutely every culture without exception, has a sense of beauty and has rituals with super rich imagination and symbols and and a certain way of expressing sensitivity and and having stories to make sense of the world, and it's like all the functions that we're supposed to gain from art is there. It's just not disconnected, it's not autonomous, and is based on reciprocity, on mutuality. It's not this extractivist process. It's that's the one of the major issues that we have with art as we know it, the system of art as we know it, is that it's really extractive, in the sense that extractivism is basically you take resources from somewhere, you transform that to give it value somewhere else without any kind of consideration of how the extraction has impacted the life of the communities of humans and more than humans. It's like it's a very unilateral process, and I think that most of the art is actually a very extractive process. Even when people, and I think that there are loads of artists that are very sincere in their concern for the issues that they are dealing with, but there is no sense of reciprocity. The sense of reciprocity is, I'm going to change the minds of people that hopefully at some point are going to do something about it, is that that's not reciprocity. And I find that the movement of re-triggering reciprocity in one's life is what makes it super rich. And a bit of a head fuck as well. One of the greatest shock in my life was starting to read the communiques issued by the Zapatistas. For me, it was just like, oh my God. Here are people who are reinventing everything. They're reinventing political communication. They're reinventing the ways of apprehending what is a local struggle, a global struggle.
And they are an autonomous area in Mexico for the people who who don't know.
Yeah. And who rose in 1994 and produced. They were very, very prolific and issued an enormous amount of communiques that were just totally extraordinary. And this is through there that I realized that actually what they were talking about was the art of life. That there was something around the capacity to express and live through attention and beauty. And this is when I started getting really interested in the forms that desire to pay attention and to transform one's world in a way that is not this exclusive and excluding process.
I think in the book you also mention how somewhere along the way ethics and aesthetics also sort of were divided.
Mm-hmm.
And actually there's bringing those two things together. I mean, an artwork that is done in or making art that has this reciprocity that you mentioned can also take on a deeper dimension of beauty when there is also justice.
Yeah.
In the picture. So one quote that I really liked was, "The best magic, as well as the best art and activism, assumes that attention is an organizing principle of reality, an instrument of imagination."
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that a little bit?
For me, the embodiment of that is what I was talking about in this movement. It's this notion that we all have this capacity to bend reality by setting an intention, and not just a vague willingness, but setting an intention and give it all. That's and that's what magic is, and I think that this is what activism is. And when you do that, the giving it all is to do it with passion and with true attention. In the Laboratory of Insurrectionary Imagination, so the collective that we set up with Jay, we've always said that art is just paying attention. It's not just, but it is paying attention. And that means that anything that you truly pay attention to can become art. A meal can become art. A haircut can become art. Lovemaking can become art. And it doesn't mean that, when you just throw a handful of pasta in boiling water without thinking about it, that's art. Not at all. But when you've put in attention and an intention in a meal, then it becomes art. And that is also the move for magic and activism. And I think that, and it's really interesting that magic, the notion of magic has turned into this really weird sense that things happen by themselves without any kind of other factors. It's like when we say, oh, well, it's that this has magically appeared. And I think that for me, it's more about you set your intentions and you have a belief that it can't happen without you doing everything you need to do and everything you can. But that there's going to be loads of other forces that are going to come into the mix and that is going to make it happen. And I think that this is also what activism and what art is all about, is that and I think also that this is why these can't really be individualistic endeavors. It's that I think that to have this process of symbiosis and coming together of all that needs to happen is that there needs to be a collective dimension. And collective is not necessarily loads and loads and loads of different people. But I think that it's a capacity to apprehend what is around you, to apprehend your world as being much more than just yourself. And that means that that there are other humans, other non-humans, and loads of otherness that you don't know, that you have no control over, but that are gonna come into the process if you set it the right way. I think that for me, this is what the common thread between magic and art and activism is. And therefore it's about being very sincere and very embracing and very organized.
Very organized. Well, you mentioned one of those sort of magic formulas was when the people of the ZAD put together this 6-point manifesto, would you call it? That said, there will never be an airport, and so that was kind of the magical invocation. There will never be an airport, and that maybe made it more possible for that to happen. You also mentioned, the role of ritual. Do you want to say anything about how you've worked with that here?
Yeah. Well, I can say a bit about how we've worked with rituals. And obviously we haven't invented rituals on the ZAD. Like, I think that any community has rituals. And but what we tried to do was to actually make invitations at some important moments. So, for instance, the first one was for the anniversary of the abandonment of the airport, the first anniversary, because the ZAD has just gone through a really, really traumatic phase of the cancellation of the airport. Came with a very, very violent period marked by the military operation to try to evict loads of people and a lot of internal conflict. And that's basically, we thought, well, we're kind of a poly-traumatized community, and ritual is a form that I believe always has a dimension of care, and so to make an invitation of the form that would hopefully allow people to regain a sense of togetherness and care and common narrative. That was not neither an assembly nor a party nor a meeting. There was a very specific moment. Felt really interesting to us, and we also set as an intention for ourselves to celebrate the 8 kind of pagan celebrations of seasonality. So the 2 solstices, the 2 equinoxes, and then Beltane, Samhain, Imbolc. So that's 8 a year, which is really quite a lot. So we haven't quite managed to do them all. But we've been doing quite a few, and the whole point of these moments is that they're not shows, they're not spectacles, they're an invitation where people take part. What is really interesting is that there are more and more people coming to these rituals, because initially, there was a bit of reticence, like what, and now there's a sense of they're joyful moments that are very much about celebrating our link to each other and to this territory, and to what we're trying to do and where we're coming from, which I think is really important, and again have been stolen and or recuperated. It's like, it's really interesting. Well, yeah, it's interesting. It's infuriating, but it's interesting to see how many of these very important dates have been turned into, first, from pagan celebrations to Christian celebrations, and then to consumerist celebrations. How Samhain has become Halloween, and so and it's interesting and important to us to kind of reclaim these moments and to make them ours. So we always try to make them joyful and really not solemn. I think that we're finding it really nourishing, but to work on these rituals.
I think one of the interesting things that you talk about in your book as well is how when we become more intertwined with where we are living and become more of a place and of the territory. Of course, all these things that we already know, that we're not separate from anything, that everything is connected through flows and metabolisms. It becomes more tangible because you're more aware. I mean, it becomes easier to see those things if you have your own compost pile, or if you are really dependent on the people that you live with and so on. And I think the interesting thing is that there is everything is this continuous flow, and that there still can be a kind of individuality or a kind of individuals, there still can be something called Ingrid, and that I'm in this process of a continuous process of Ingriding, and that it's through these relations with other beings, other flows that can sort of happen. And I guess the interesting thing when you're part of a kind of anarchist experiment, if you could call this that, it is kind of this, how you can be an Ingriding at the same time as you make space for all the other people and all the other non-people and all the others that we don't know about, as you mentioned, to be flourishing as well. Of course, it's we have more direct communication often with other humans, and they're often the ones that we have conflicts with, and so that's often the one that is the most difficult. But it's happening. This negotiation is happening on all those levels. So I don't know. Do you have any reflections on that?
That actually, I really agree that this is the process and the challenge, and at the same time, what I find really interesting is that one of the things, like the process of leaving London involved for Jay and I to actually go on a trip for almost a year throughout Europe, where we visited 12 different what we called utopian communities, or communities or initiatives, or that all had a dimension of self-organization, and were not built around religion. And what was really interesting is that, without exception, what all of them said was, you learn so much more and so much faster when you live with other people than when you live on your own or in just a very small unit like a couple or a family. And this certainly has been my experience. It's that it really feels like it's been a very accelerated process of learning and becoming. And I think that this is what is also, it's one of the greatest lie of the modern project, is this idea that there would be a sense that freedom has to be an individualistic process. And I don't believe that's true. I think that somehow, and it's like it's actually very well described in the Invisible Committee. They say, well, you're free if you are connected. It's that you're free if you're connected to other people, if you have food, if you have shelter, and that doesn't happen just, if you're only on your own. So it's through connection that you can gain this sense of freedom, and freedom not as I can do whatever I want, also as though what I want came only from me. It's like very often what I want is the result of interactions anyway. And so I think that there is a real richness in that, in a life that is very intertwined and very connected. And interestingly, it's like I haven't felt that I was kind of, losing a sense of who I was. If anything, it became more acute. And that is not necessarily always a very good surprise, So you sometimes have to face some parts of yourself and like, really? But I feel that it's been more acute and certainly much, much, much richer than the life with much fewer interactions.
What would you say to people who are, people are working away, living their lives, and maybe don't feel like they at the moment could, for example, move to live in a community or just have the capacity to start a community? Are there ways to begin to create and imagine the world that we would want to see?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that I'm very, very against any proposal that would become the proposal, that this is the thing you need to do and it's all going to be fine. I think it's super dangerous, and I think that everything is contextual, and we need a vast multiplicity of ways of going about one's life. And I think that there are so many different ways. I mean, I have no idea what I would say to, you know, people just like, who the hell am I? And to go and say, well, go and do this. I certainly don't know. But I think that one of the myths that I really would like to debunk is this idea that doing things collectively is harsh and difficult and complicated, and you know, it's really interesting. The number of people that I meet and they're like, oh, I could never live with 10 people. It's like, but did you try? Like, how do you know? And it's like, oh no, you know, it's difficult enough to live with one person. With 10 it would be even more complicated. It's like, it has fuck all to do with, you know, it's not a kind of, you know, just like, because the tensions that you have when you live with only one person are totally different with, you know, with what you go through. And yes, it's very often very difficult, but gosh, I think that if there is, you know, one of the things that the COVID period has shown so dramatically is how loneliness or the nuclear family is not a setting that is resilient. It's like when there is a crisis like that, it's really, really, really hard. And as far as I know, most of the people who were living collectively went through that period in a way that was so much less difficult. And I think that that's really something that, yeah, I really want to debunk. Is like, it's not more complicated to do things with people than to do them by yourself. It's very different. It's complicated in completely different ways. But it's not true in my view that it's so much more complicated. I think that we've been fed this myth, like, you know, go and do things on your own, and I think that it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we've been so robbed of all the tools. It's like, you know, like living collectively is something that we don't learn. It's like we keep being taught that it's never going to work, that it's, you know, that the only way you can live, you know, in any large number is through a mega hierarchical structure, you know, in rows, like the classroom, you know. But moments where you're being actually given the tools to make decisions together, to enjoy the sharing, and that's something that is absolutely not taught and shared. So obviously, when you try age 25 or 30, well, you have no idea how to do it, so it's very complicated. But, you know, it's like, that's like anything. It's a process of learning, and I really think that, like anything, there really can be joy in that process. And I really, really believe that that we can only be resilient collectively, and that is not necessarily being 10 in a house in the countryside. So there are many, many different ways of doing things together. But I think that the temptation to withdraw more and more every time things are complicated, and to I think that this is generating a lot of fragility in many different ways: mental fragility, social fragility, ecological fragility. It's like, you know, when you think of all the consequences of that increase in individualism, like, you know, just the fact that there are a crazy number of flats and houses for one, and cars for one, and infrastructures for one, and that is just ecologically completely nonsensical, to people who are feeling extremely lonely and are dying of loneliness. And you look at all that and you think, really? So we're going to do more of this, and we're going to keep saying that doing things together is complicated? Or are we going to relearn to do it together? And for me, I know that for me, it's been a really, really joyful process. And you can catch me, any week wanting to, cut my housemates into pieces. It's like, it's
totally normal.
It's, I think that's part and parcel. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great.
Me come to the Birckbeck. You'll find links to the things we talked about, as well as Isa and Jay's book, in the description of the episode or at forestofthought.com. Stay tuned for the next stop on this mini tour, which will involve a philosopher in a garden in Paris. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the podcast on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/forestofthought. Thanks so much to Isa, Jay, and everyone at La Hollandière for having us and for the delicious food. And special thanks to Howard for all his help, including carting me around Brittany in his Land Rover. Thanks for listening, and speak to you next time.